Is this Cybex old school plate loaded row machine any good? I've heard it's actually a very rare and sought after gym machine, so I figured I'd do a few sets on it and see how it goes. Now you might see the brand name Cybex on a machine and think, well, it's Cybex, it must be a good machine. But as you're going to see shortly, that's actually not always the case. This machine does look pretty cool. It's got a bit of a third-class lever system going on in it, which we're going to take a look at shortly. And the arm path is okay, but as you get to the end of the range, it does kind of angle up a little bit, which you'll be able to see with my wrist there, kind of angling outwards, which I don't really want. But it's got a nice chest support on it and seat adjustability, which is cool. The big downside of this machine, though, is that resistance profile is really pretty average. The resistance starts off reasonably hard, and then it just gets harder as you get towards the end of the range on the exercise. Now you might be wondering, well, why is this resistance profile so bad? So I'm going to show you here. We've got a third-class lever system going on here with the fulcrum or axis on this end. Then we have the belt kind of pulling up on that lever in the middle. And then we've got the weight plate at the end there. Now take a look at the angle of that belt there, the force angle we got going on at the start of the range. It's actually a fair way away from 90 degrees. At this very start, you can see here on the screen. But then as we move through the range, that force angle gets closer to 90 degrees with the belt and that lever. However, we've also got a weight plate that's starting off closer to the axis. But then as you can see here, as we go through the range, that weight plate actually moves further away from the axis. So my first thought was, well, the force angle is improving, but the weight plate's getting further away. So that change in resistance should kind of be offset. But unfortunately, it doesn't actually offset the change in distance from the weight plate to the axis. That distance increases. And what happens is it essentially is offsetting any benefits you're getting from that change in force angle at the lever there. Now, there might also be other things going on inside of the machine that can influence this resistance. But from talking with other people, Boba Boys Equipment and a few other guys, they're suggesting that it's likely that that weight plate moving further away from the axis is probably the biggest influence on actually making that resistance increase where you don't want it to be increasing. In rowing exercises, we want that resistance dropping off as we get towards the end of the range in a row, because that's where us humans, we get really weak towards the end of the range. And this one is essentially doing the opposite of what we want. However, I have seen a video from a guy called Nathan of Domination Nation. He's got a ton of gym machines and he's actually modified this Cybex Plate Loaded Row and he's set it up such that he's shortened that belt such that now it essentially gets, that weight plate gets closer to the axis as you go through the range of motion. So that could actually be creating some drop off on his version. He's also modified the handles and done a few other things with it. So you can check that out. I'll put the link in the description of this video if you want to see a modified version of this machine that's probably a little bit superior to the one that I'm using. If you have an unmodified version of this machine, you're probably not going to enjoy it a whole lot just because that resistance profile does increase so dramatically as we're getting weaker. You could try to modify it by shortening that belt, but you'd really want to know what you're doing before doing that. And if you don't have the ability to do it, I wouldn't recommend just jumping in and buying one of these unless you're pretty confident you can kind of play around with it and get a modification going. It's going to help you get more out of the machine. I don't have one of these machines. I haven't modified one myself, so I can't tell you much more about how that modification might go to get the most out of it. As always, keen to hear your thoughts on it. Have you used one of these in the past? What do you think? Have you noticed that that resistance actually does increase significantly as you go through the range? And has anyone else modified one of these machines? Be curious to know what you've done to it to try and improve that resistance profile. And if you've got any questions or comments, chuck them below and I'll talk to you again real soon.